we have one more panelist, Ayabdir, who is joining us. She was with us earlier. She just had to restart her computer, and she'll be with us right away. Then, without further ado, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be at this moment. We are happy to have you with us, and we welcome you to this year's International Women's Day event. I am so happy and honored to be co-moderating this webinar today with my co-moderator for the last 3 years, Ambassador Charlotta Sparre. So as some of you know, for the past 3 years, the Swedish Institute, the Swedish Dialogue Institute for the Middle East and North Africa, and the Isam Faris Institute for Public Policy and International Affairs at the American University of Beirut have had a fruitful collaboration on the Women, Peace and Security agenda. In 2021 and 2022, our two institutes co-hosted webinars on this occasion of International Women's Day. The first was entitled, How Inclusive is Inclusive Peacebuilding? And the second, in 2022, was How Inclusive is a Sustainable Tomorrow. Both previous events have aimed at bringing together diverse male and female voices for dialogue and to present recommendations on how to enhance inclusive representation in different sectors and at policy and decision-making level. Our ethos, our spirit, our mantra from day one has been, we don't work in silos, we want to break the silos and bring all sectors together, all voices together for true inclusive peace building. Continuing this close collaboration today, the two institutes today are discussing a new theme, this year's theme. And I'm going to leave the floor to Ambassador Charlotta Sparre to take it away from here. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Karma, and many warm thanks to the Isam Faris Institute. We're also really excited to have this collaboration this year again. And as Karma said, it's really a question of inclusivity and of breaking the silos. The theme of this year's International Women's Day, as you probably all know, is Digital, Innovation and Technology for Gender Equality. And in this panel, we have decided to look at how inclusive peace building is in the digital age and in the Middle East, North Africa region. While there is good reason to celebrate the women and girls who are championing the advancement of transformative technologies and digital education, it is also equally essential to recognize that there is a digital gap and to explore the impacts of widening economic and social inequalities. It's also important to spotlight the need for protecting the rights of women and girls in digital spaces and addressing online gender-based violence. A gender-based and gender-responsive approach to innovation, technology, and digital education can increase the awareness of women and girls regarding their rights and their engagement. Advancement in digital technology offer great opportunities to address developmental issues, humanitarian challenges, and contribute to peace building and contribute to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. As we are all experiencing in our everyday life, technology is increasingly shaping every dimension of our lives, of our ways of living even. In promoting peaceful and inclusive societies in line with the SDG 16 and contributing to gender equality and the Women, Peace and Security agenda, ICT has a great potential to be a transformative power and an enabler for a bottom-up empowerment and making development more inclusive, more open, more smart. We know that there are great potentials for better solutions, but we also know that in practice, there are substantial challenges. There are challenges that we need to be aware of, and there are challenges that we need to address. So despite the meaningful progress that we have been seeing in the implementation of the Women, Peace and Security Agenda, peace building efforts by women still remain hampered by several challenges, and the digital divide is one of them. The digital ecosystems have also revealed a darker side, very closely intertwined with gender inequalities. And I think there are increasing concerns about new exclusions and new hierarchies, from the lack of participation to harassment and abuse. Women's experiences in the technological space are sometimes amplifying the inequalities that exist. And this is particularly true in conflict contexts that are characterized by limited connectivity and digital literacy. So to unpack all these really important issues, and in looking at gender inclusive peace building in the digital age, we have invited an absolutely amazing, impressive group of speakers. And as we are looking at peace building in this inclusive way, our starting point has been precisely what Karma said in the beginning, to make sure that we have different actors from different parts of society that can help in looking to how conflicts can be prevented, how to protect, how to solve conflict, and how to work on relief and reconstruction. So in all of this work, it is of course absolutely crucial to look at the underlying conditions, to look at the drivers of conflicts in the first place, and to look at issues like governance, education, job creation, opportunities to create decent lives and decent living conditions. So therefore, we have invited this amazing group of speakers from diverse and different walks of life to shed some light on the questions and discuss how inclusive is peace building in the digital age. In a minute, Karma will be introducing our keynote speaker, the UN Women Regional Director, Susan Michael. I will then moderate the panel with Hala Bugaighis from Libya, Abiakar from Lebanon, Nadim, Houry, also Lebanon, but also a wider Arab hat, and Nadine, Weheba from Egypt. I will introduce them more later. And after the panel discussion, we will open up for Q&A, and then try at the end to collect some recommendations from our speakers for our report. And with that, I would like to hand over again to you, Karma.
Thank you. Thank you, Charlotta, for framing today's webinar so eloquently. We're very honored to have with us for the keynote address today, the Regional Director of UN Women, Ms. Susan Michael. Thank you so much. I know this week is a very, very intense week for you. Every day is a very intense day, and every day is Women's Day, but this week particularly is a little bit more intense. So thank you for taking the time to be with us. Ms. Susan Michael is the Regional Director of the United Nations Entity for Gender Equality and the Empowerment of Women, otherwise known as UN Women, for the Arab states. In this capacity, she leads UN Women's normative, program, and coordination work in the Middle East and North Africa. Susan brings with her over 20 years of experience in development and humanitarian work in the region, including at the Swedish International Development Cooperation Agency, SIDA, and several years of experience within the UN system, including with UNICEF and OCHA. Thank you so much once again for being with us. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Karma. For me personally, it's a great pleasure to be with all of you here today. Karma, Ambassador, dear panelists, and dear colleagues and dear friends. At the outset, I would like to thank the Swedish Dialogue Institute for the Middle East and the North Africa and the Issam Fares Institute at the American University of Beirut for convening this webinar in the context of the International Women's Day. Colleagues and friends, needless to say that this is a region that has seen multiple wars only in the past 1 or 2 decades, wars that have turned into humanitarian crises. Some of them have been labeled the largest in the world, and some of these humanitarian crises have turned into protracted crises, i.e. extended and lengthy crises in the region. So wars and these crises affect genders differently. Let's take, for example, mass recruitment in armed forces. We know that this particular area affects boys and men unproportionately. Same with mass executions, affecting boys and men unproportionately. But then there are very distinct, very specific areas in which we know by evidence, not only from wars and humanitarian crises in this part of the world, but globally, where women and girls are unproportionately affected. Gender-based violence is one example. And this is, of course, an example that we have read a lot about and we've researched quite profoundly. But what is equally interesting is what happens after that immediate onset humanitarian situation, when the humanitarian situation tends to move over to the so-called protracted period. For example, and again, this doesn't only come from our own region, but globally, girls are the first to be pulled out of schools when a humanitarian situation extends 1 to 1.5 years. Also, the first to lose jobs in humanitarian crises and in war-affected areas are women. But we also know that something very distinct happens when you reach that time period where you are focusing on drafting or negotiating a peace agreement. That's where I would say there's a culmination of marginalization of women and girls. And also, unfortunately, not distinctively for our own region. This is a global phenomenon. One of the most wide and I would say profound and comprehensive researches was conducted in 2020, and it looked back from the years 1992 to 2019. During this period of time, we found that women constituted only 13% of negotiators worldwide and only 6% of mediators and signatories of peace processes. What's even more interesting is that this comes as a direct opposite to the facts and evidence we have at hand, demonstrating that when women are included in peace agreements, this is the inclusivity aspect that the ambassador alluded to earlier, that women are included in peace agreements, they're more likely to be reached and implemented. One of the largest studies that were conducted a couple of years ago showed that peace agreements with women signatories have on average an implementation rate of 89% compared to 76% were agreements with only male signatories. So the issue of inclusiveness in peace negotiations and peace agreement cannot be underestimated. Now to focus a little bit more specifically on today's theme, as demonstrated during the COVID-19 pandemic, dear colleagues and friends, and the temporary move of peace and political processes to online spaces showed us that technology can improve accessibility of peace-building processes. Because technology can provide new pathways for increasing access to information on peace and political processes beyond the actual access to be an active part of the negotiation itself. One element here, which is quite important and interesting to look at, is the UN Women app that was developed 2 years ago, called the Peacefem app. I don't know how many of you have actually entered that app, but I would recommend you to look at it because it's been one of the most popular apps that we have developed in the past years. So UN Women, together with academic partners across the world, developed this mobile application, the Peacefem. And the goal of this application, or the goal of this app, is to ensure that peace builders, including in the MENA region and beyond the MENA region, can access information that is really concrete and tangible and specific for the process or the peace negotiation that you are involved in. For example, knowledge on gender in peace agreements, in order to draw examples from the best practices from all around the world and to apply those practices to your distinct region. It also has very solid and very interesting examples of gender responsive paragraphs that can be tailored to whatever peace negotiation you are involved in any part of the world. And I'm not surprised myself that this app has so far reached users from over 60 countries worldwide. Many of those are in this exact region, our own region. Let me also take this opportunity before I wrap up to underscore that UN Women has always been and is very proud to be partnering with the Issam Fares Institute for Public Policy and International Affairs. Over the past years, as many of you know, UN Women work closely with IFI, which is the shortening of the institute, to enhance women's leadership in peace and political process in the MENA region specifically, through very targeted research and through convening relevant stakeholders for policy dialogues and knowledge sharing. And in 2023, we're actually taking that partnership to the next level. And I'm thrilled to announce that starting this year, UN Women and IFI will be hosting an annual policy forum on WPS in the MENA region. Colleagues and friends, I have no doubt that today's discussion will bring to the fore interesting insights from inclusive peace building in the digital age and provide us all with those tangible examples, with those concrete examples of how technology and innovation can help to advance women's meaningful and safe participation in peace and political processes in the MENA region and beyond. And I look forward to the discussion, and as Ambassador knows, I will be able to join you at least 20 more minutes. And I actually would have an opportunity to maybe log on a little bit later, but at least I'm with you for the first half an hour. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much, Susanne, for joining us, for sharing this wisdom and insight. And we're all excited to look in again at the app for those of us who have seen it before. And again, a recommendation to those of you who haven't seen it. And we're also looking forward to learning more eventually about the annual event with IFI and UN Women. So let me now introduce our panelists. We have with us Hala Bugaighis, who is a senior Libyan researcher, consultant, and women's rights activist. In 2015, she co-founded Dusur Center for Studies and Development, a pioneer Libyan think and do tank working on economic development and advocating for women's economic inclusion. We have Aya Badair, who is participating from the US. Aya is an entrepreneur, an engineer, and a social activist. She is the inventor of Little Bits, the electronic building block that transformed the STEM education for millions of kids around the world. And her work centers very much around empowering of everyone to become tomorrow's change makers. These days, she's also working on ethical technology, something that I'm very curious to learn more about. Then we have Nadim Houry, who is an international lawyer and public policy expert with extensive experience working in the MENA region. He is currently the executive director of the Arab Reform Initiative, and which is a leading regional think tank with offices in Paris, Beirut, and Tunis, working for social justice, democratic reform, and accountable institutions. And last but not least, we have Nadine Weheba, who is the Associate Director for Research Global Networks for the Access to Knowledge and Development Center at the School of Business at the American University in Cairo. And Nadine works on political economy of information communication technologies, innovation and development. And we will start with a quick question to all of you, but let me again remind you of the setting. We're looking at peace building in this very broad sense, recognizing the importance that different actors from different parts of society play, and the need to advance the women, peace and security agenda, and that we need to thereby also look into the underlying conditions and driving factors that drive conflict, governance issues, educational issues, job creation, and as I mentioned before, the opportunities to create decent life and living conditions. So you are coming from different walks of life, and in reflecting on peace building and women's participation in the digital age, I would first like to ask you, can technology address the underlying structural problems that drive the digital gender gap in the first place? And if so, how? And I suggest that we start with Hala, Aya, Nadim, Nadine, and then Susanne. It would be great if we could hear your reflection of that as well. So Hala.
Thank you so much, everyone. I'm so happy to be here. So to answer the question, I really don't want to go into deep about, the issue of access to ICT and the digital privilege that is really a concern in the region in general. But the question about technology, and realistically speaking, I think the technology could be a double-edged sword. So at first, women really ride the wave and started to utilize the technology to gain more access to spaces that were historically exclusive for men. So it's like employment, business, also activism and politics. However, the profound patriarchal system in this region, I think it found its way to disrupt this digital euphoria, if I may say, and started to extend its iron fist to the digital space. And I think this is why we see issues like cyber violence, disinformation campaigns targeting women are now one of the significant issues facing women today. So to answer the question, the structural problem prevailed despite of the technology, but still the technology is the only way to solve these issues. So there is more commitments, more work needs to be done to somehow advance this situation. And here I'll stop. Thank you, Charlotta.
Thank you very much to starting with showing some of these enormous complexities. Aya.
Technology absolutely has the opportunity to help redress the gender divide and structural problems that we already see and have seen in society on one condition, which is what is the role that women play in digital spaces and platforms. Women and men participate online and with digital technology somewhat equally, 93-94%, comparing women and men. But the main difference is men are in positions of influence, leadership, and design decisions, whereas women are more consumers of digital technologies. About 28% of women that of women work in technology, compared to about 80-90% white and Asian males. So the position they hold is really, really important. And this is important for multiple reasons. We know that being in a position of leadership and of design decision affects the kind of products you put out in the world, affects the kinds of bias you bring with you into these technologies, and affects, as a result, how people use these technologies. And so we can talk about this later in specific fields such as harassment or AI or different things. We'll get to that later. But at a very, very basic level, if we are recreating technology and continuing to create technology in the way we have been doing it and we are doing it today, what we're going to end up with is more of the same, transferring the structural divides that we already have in society onto technology, amplifying them, increasing them. And because we are now talking about technologies that oftentimes have their own self-fulfilling prophecies, we are going to essentially lose the ability to affect change going forward. So I think that the potential is possible, but it is a very, very critical moment in which we can influence how it is done.
Thank you very much, Aya. Nadim.
Thank you for having me. And I agree with a lot of what Hala and I have said, in the sense that many of us had hoped that technology will be the new digital public space in the Arab region and would democratize access to communication. And for a brief amount of time it was, but we quickly realized that what ails, the structural problems in your question, continue to exist online as they do in the real world. And there isn't a technological fix as such to some of these structural patriarchal power dynamics. And we've seen that in a number of examples. I mean, first, just if we look at the stats about online harassment, not just in the MENA region, across the world, it's a way of people continuing to harass. And we see that women are predominantly targets of such harassment. I'll give you a very small anecdote. I was looking a few months ago at the stats of users of our website at the Arab Reform Initiative. And for some publication, I was surprised. It was very male-dominated, the genders, which didn't make sense given the topic. And as we started digging into it, it turns out many of the users were actually women, but they identified as men online as a way of protecting themselves, particularly in conflict countries. So it just gives you an example of some of the challenges. But there are, I think, so it is, there's also a second problem, which is, one of the issues why violence remains to be so prevalent and continues to restrict, women, not just in peace building, but across so many sectors, is lack of accountability for these attacks. And we realize that actually the online space is also a space where there's rampant impunity. And particularly, I think here there's also global dynamics between North and South, because frankly, social media platforms are less sensitive to the needs of people in the global South compared to the global North. And that's not just limited to the MENA region. We now know, for instance, that Facebook's response to Sri Lanka was abysmal and led to a lot of violence, whereas they're a lot more responsive, put more resources to monitor, for instance, hate speech in languages like English in North America or in Europe. So that's also the lack of accountability, and frankly, the role of social media platforms is something to highlight. There is, for me, a slight silver lining, which is we're seeing more and more women in STEM, so basically in science, technology, engineering, and math in the region. And some of the last stats, I think, from UNESCO showed that 57% of STEM students today are actually women in Arab countries. And I think that's encouraging. Will that translate into reimagining some of these platforms? I think that remains to be seen. But I also would caution, we're also seeing, often talk about the region in one go, and that's what I did today. But I think as well, there's a difference. And we're clearly seeing a difference between, for instance, the Gulf countries, where particularly women entrepreneurs, women in business are much more today visible electronically, I would say, in digital spaces than they are in conflict-ridden countries. So I think even maybe how we talk about the region needs to evolve.
Thank you very much, Nadim. Nadine.
Thank you. So I'd really like to echo a lot of what my fellow panelists have said today. And I think when I first read the question, I thought that we need to think that the digital divide or the gender digital divide really reflects a developmental divide. And that will help us look at the issues that we're thinking about on the ground. Women, at least I speak from the perspective, I'll take the example of Egypt. Women face multifaceted inequalities, at least in the area of, I'm talking about education and employment. Women have higher unemployment rates than men. Men have higher literacy rates. Like Nadim was saying, even the increase in women being enrollment in STEM, at least in the case of Egypt, isn't really translating into employment in STEM areas. Another quick fact is that the informal sector, of course, is a significant and sizable employer in a country like Egypt. 50% of those employed in the formal sector are women. So what role can technology play in mitigating this gender digital divide? One area is in women's employment in the digital economy. We have seen in our research that using technology is creating some opportunities for women, such as women who are working on gig economy platforms like driving on ride sharing and that sort of thing. Also women starting their own businesses online. Of course, here the technology can offer flexibility, but it also comes with its shortcomings. And just to wrap up, we've done several number of interviews with women in different projects that we've been working on, and all of them echoed that the technology was, of course, an enabler for them, but there was a lot of other things that they needed support with, like skills training, digital marketing, financial support, support with taking care of their children while they work. So definitely technology would be necessary to allow this participation for women in this aspect of the digital economy, but it's not sufficient on its own. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nadine. And Susanne, what is your take on this?
Well, my take is actually very similar to my dear panelists' take, actually. And just the short answer is this an opportunity for women? The technological advancement, would that bring opportunities for women? I would say without even hesitating, an absolute yes. But at the same time, of course, the fears and the risks that some of the panelists alluded to. One of the first researches and studies on online violence in the Arab region, as many of you know, was conducted by UN Women a couple of 2 years ago. And it was interesting that we were actually attacked just by the mere fact of wanting to dig deeper into the area of online violence from a gender perspective. But that analysis showed that more than 50% of women felt very unsafe in online spaces and had been, of course, subjected to harassment. I actually think that figure is probably higher in real life. But nevertheless, it's a relatively high number, but it's also equivalent to what we see from many other parts of the world. Now, when it comes to the problem that I think Aya alluded to, I think it's critical that you have most of the forces behind the actual decision-making power in the technology of today happens to be men. And we still lack a proportion of women that would lie behind the conceptual, intellectual, and design framework thinking behind the technology that we see today. And for me, it's a bit of a surprise. Actually, it's not a surprise, but it's a bit of a paradox, because you and I have spoken about this before, Ambassador, and this is an area that Nadim also alluded to, the paradox of STEM in our region. We actually think of STEM, well-educated women in STEM, as a new phenomenon in the Arab state, while it's not. So we all know that we have some of the pioneering researchers in physics, in mathematics, in science coming from this region are actually born in the 1930s. So there's a long tradition of female researchers in this region. Now, STEM, the figure that Nadim alluded to, 57%, is interesting for two reasons. A, it's relatively high. B, it's higher than other regions. It's actually higher than the US and higher in Europe. So it's actually a very interesting question. Why doesn't this translate into jobs? And here I'll come back to Nadine, because I firmly believe that what you need to do, particularly in our region, to translate those well-educated women into entering the labor workforce that has been stagnating around 21% in this region for 3 solid decades, with some exceptions of the GCC countries, is a multidisciplinary package approach, right? It's about, yes, entering the job and labor market. It's equally about social norms. It's equally about legal structures. Do we have laws that prohibit women to enter certain professions today? Yes, we still have in our region. Those need, of course, to be amended. It's also about the care. I think Nadine or Nadim alluded to that. This is the region with the lowest proportion of provision of care services to women. And we know that this is really a formula of success, because we know it from Europe and US and many other countries. You establish a national care service system, then there is a jump in women entering the labor force. But it's also about communication, as the other panelists said. But the important thing is that it's a package. It's a multidisciplinary package, and it needs to be implemented and realized, and this is important, simultaneously. And that's one of the reasons why job creation projects haven't succeeded in this region because we focus silo-wise either on legal amendments or social norm or care, but these all has to be provided as a package simultaneously and synced with each other. And I believe that only with that approach will we see that jump, the surge in women labor force participation, particularly in STEM, that we really want to see, because we have seen it in some countries worldwide and some of them in our own region, in the GCC. So it's definitely feasible. It's definitely feasible. We have the formula.
Thank you, and thank you for underlining again the importance of breaking the silos and finding ways of collaborating at different levels, and the multidisciplinary approach that is absolutely crucial. So, dear panelists, I would like to turn to you again. I will have to remind you of the brevity. I would love to sit here the whole afternoon and listen to you, but we will have to continue to do that at other occasions. But let me turn to you, Hala, now. You've been working on economic development in Libya for many years, and you have been working on finding solutions to the day-to-day challenges through innovation. So I would like to hear a little bit more, building on your experiences of the conflict context in Libya. What are some of the ways that ICT can change the prospect for inclusive peace building, not only in Libya, but in the region at large?
Thank you so much, Charlotta. So first, I want to say that technology, in particular in the social media, has played a negative role in Libya, right? In the conflict of Libya. So it was deeply weaponized. But to focus on women, so first in the peace processes, in the peace talks and conflict management, I would like to add on what Ms. Michaeli said, that beside access to information, the technology played a major role in participation of women. So for instance, the UN mission managed to include more women in the process by organizing online consultation sessions. I think in the last process, more than 120 women were consulted from different cities. Of course, their recommendations were collected and they were printed out and presented to the political dialogue members. This wouldn't be possible without the technology and the tools provided. So this is very, very important. Also, when it talks about inclusion in general, I think the UN mission developed an online tool to moderate discussions between Libyan youth and also other from marginalized group and the special envoy directly. So I think it was like an online app or an online website that you go there and you have a live discussion and questions in a very safe manner with the envoy herself. And I think this was a brilliant tool. In my opinion, I think it managed to give more legitimacy to the UN efforts in Libya, but it also built the trust and of course include more. So I think this was a very positive outcome of this. But also, I don't really like wishful thinking, and I really hate to be the pessimist. But also, when it comes to the peace building efforts, the women were subject to a severe, vicious online disinformation campaigns, targeting their integrity and trying to discredit them and discredit the whole process. Because of course, when it comes when the campaigns comes in for targeting women, many will support them, of course. So I think it was very the disinformation campaigns, the hate speech, all of the defamation. It was a real issue in the whole process when it comes to women. So just I know that there is a time, the time is critical, but I know that Libya might not be the best example when it comes to preventing conflict, since the conflict is still ongoing. But I think there is a lot of good lessons that we can draw from our experience and we can build on it. So and here I will stop. Sorry for staying longer.
Thank you, and we'll come back also to the question of recommendations later, but building on both the positive stories, but also I think it's absolutely essential that we can hold two thoughts or more in our minds at the same time. We need to both be able to recognize the possibility, the potential, and the positive elements that technology can hold, but also to recognize that because the world looks the way it does, there are enormous challenges, and they are applicable, as many of you have said, not only in the so to say in the real world, but also are transferred into the technological space. So Aya, I would like to turn to you now. You have for years been working on empowering youth, in particular girls, to be more involved in the digital world. You're also a political and social activist. So in your view and with your experience, how do you see that a digital world can contribute to establishing more peaceful and just societies in the MENA region? And maybe if you could also share some reflections on the ethical work that you are doing, and what is it that actually can be done to maybe address some of the challenges that all of you have been raising. Over to you, Aya.
So I have been working in the field of empowering underserved communities to enter technology for the past 15 years, with always a particular focus on women. And I've come to be convinced that the only lever that matters is having more women in positions of influence. Yes, you know, as Nadim shared, the rates of women participation in STEM in colleges have been rising. In the Arab world, the numbers are encouraging. The reality is when they enter the workforce, the numbers start dropping pretty quickly, not just in the MENA region, in the entire world. And the rise to leadership in these companies dropped dramatically as well because of issues of harassment in the workplace, less opportunities, leadership always promoting people that look like them, because of the caregiving responsibilities in the families always fall on women, etc., etc. Many reasons that happens. And so as a result, you have very few women at leadership positions and in design and technology creation positions. Why is that important? Who designs a product is very important in affecting how the product is used and how it affects society. Let's forget about technology for a minute. There are studies that show that when women architects are involved in designing a building, they are less likely to put a glass staircase in an office building. And any woman who's ever worked in any workplace knows that glass staircases are not very conducive for women using them. There are studies that show that when women are involved in designing an outdoor space, they are much more thoughtful about where to put the parking lot and how the parking lot is designed and how it's well lit, because they are much more aware of harassment and abuse and you know, risks, violence that women risk. So the lived experience women bring into designing products are mission critical in creating those environments that are more inclusive to women using them going forward. And so when we look at some of the big technologies that are opportunities for peace building, obviously social media, in general, kind of online spaces for communication, that's where people are learning about the issues that are important to them. That's where community building is happening. That's where you're communicating with people. That's an extremely important place. Not enough women are participating. And as a result, these places are still rife with a lot of harassment. I want to take the example of the recent studies that we saw on young girls and the rates of depression and body image issues due to social media, staggering numbers that are only increasing because of the products that we're putting out. So, for example, the filters that you have on TikTok are sending messages to girls that they have to look a certain way and they have to abide by certain standards of beauty that don't exist. Well, these are the girls that are then going on Zoom and having these, participating in these webinars, in these classes. They're learning, they're teaching, and so if we're already putting this this huge onus on them to look a certain way, you're already communicating priorities that are at odds with what the priorities actually are. Then, so that's sort of, if you want, at the low end of the spectrum, even though it's very serious. And then at the high end of the spectrum, you have the risks with fields such as AI, where in the case of artificial intelligence, we are not telling computers or robots what to do. We are in fact giving them troves of training data that they are going to, that these machines are learning from, and then generally creating new content of various forms. And so when bias exists, A, in the training data that exists, and B, in the way the algorithms themselves are created, you are now amplifying, proliferating at an unbelievable rate structural problems that already exist. There's a recent Guardian investigation that is extremely interesting that talks simply about the Instagram and Facebook recommendation engines that are one of their tasks is to identify sexual content or inappropriate content. And because it has been trained and many times affected by populations that are training the data, it tags pictures of women and men differently. A woman showing her belly is considered lewd, it's removed, and it's explicit, and these accounts are often considered abuse, whereas a man's stomach is not. And so you have businesses that are around pregnancy, that are medical information that is getting lost. You're getting content, businesses that are now being eradicated just because of the filtering. So my soapbox is always to repeat: the biggest lever is to get more women creating technology, building technology, leading technology companies, and having positions of influence in order to build the world that we want to live in.
Thank you very much, Ayaan. Thank you also for giving several concrete examples that really help us better understand some of these issues. So with that, I would now like to turn to Nadim again. And with the Arab Reform Initiative, you have a good panoramic view of the whole of the region. And it would be interesting to hear your reflections a bit on the current situation when it comes to the digital divide and what needs to be done to bridge it.
Great, thank you. No, maybe I'll pick up. I mean, obviously, I agree with part of the solution, or maybe a key part, is to have women in positions of leadership. But from a regional perspective, I would also ask, though, which women? Because I think we have a clear regional divide between different countries, but also within countries. So I think from a sort of a intersectional analysis of some of the dynamics here, there's a clear gender dynamic, there's a clear class dynamic in the region, and there's a clear geographic dynamic, with entire parts of the region being left behind, and at best, men, women, just consuming technology, whereas we're really seeing how the sort of flow of investments, to which countries it goes, to which technologies, and so forth. And that's a real challenge that we need to tackle. Particularly, I think I don't even want to. I mean, the rural parts is a clear issue. But I think there are entire countries that are now being left behind of the sort of technological conversation taking place. That's one point. I think the second point is there was, and here I'm a bit pessimistic. There was a moment in the, around the early years of the Arab uprisings, where use of technology, there was a bit of a competition between protesters, young, marginalized voices, and the authorities about who, and it was sort of who is adopting technology faster. And unfortunately, since 2014, 2015, it looks like the autocrats have been winning that battle. in part because of their alliances and buying into fancy technology. And I'll just give the example of the use of Pegasus, the Israeli-created technology that Morocco, Gulf countries, and so many others have now purchased and used to go after activists, men and women alike, and to invade people's privacy. And we know that invasion of privacy has a differential impact between men and women, and women end up suffering a lot more from that. I think these sorts of alliances have tipped the balance now in favor of the dictatorships and the autocrats. And so they have the advantage. They know what we're talking about when we're posting, and things that you think were safe, you then learn that it wasn't safe. So I think it is, I think there is this regional dynamic that is taking place that is, I think, coming on top of these regional alliances. So whereas, if we're having this conversation perhaps in 2011, 2012, I would have said technology looks like to be a force for good in the region. We're having this conversation in 2023. I tend to think it has become, frankly, a reactionary force because of the way it's being used in the region. I really see a very strong alliance between, frankly, Tel Aviv and Gulf money. And it's mostly not for promoting emancipatory technology. It's mostly for promoting surveillance technology in our region. So that space is shrinking increasingly. It's becoming harder and harder to do this, and that makes me a bit worried. And even spaces, and you're talking about sort of public policy spaces and things like Twitter. Now with the sort of new Twitter that everybody that Elon Musk is pushing on us, it's just become so aggressive and is increasingly excluding women's voices. So yes, I think we need to think about leadership, but we also need to think about what does a welcoming space for marginalized voices look like in our region. And that means a welcoming space that actually is protective, that is not being intruded upon, not being, we're not all being segmented. That also means a space that historically marginalized voices can also participate without fearing repercussions. Because what we tend to forget is that the online often ends up offline. Women who receive threats online, suddenly people are sharing their addresses and where their children go to school and so forth. And again, that leaves us in a shrinking space. I also want to end on this is a bit bleak, but I do see a slightly interesting, and I think given actually my fellow panelists here who are all amazing women, is the role of diaspora. And perhaps one lie here is the women in diaspora of our region. And this is where I think technology has opened space. And perhaps there is the advantage that women in diaspora can engage in these spaces, and they have more tools to be protected in some ways. And I think the diaspora element is an aspect that online spaces could facilitate this sort of activism.
Thank you so very, very much, Nadim. I think it's an incredibly inspiring and interesting and complex and difficult topic with every question a different dimension. But I'm particularly glad that you brought up both the shrinking space, but also the importance of intersectionality in looking at these issues. So Nadine, in turning over to you and your work on new business models in digital economy and new technologies such as artificial intelligence and the inclusion both in Egypt and the MENA region, also in Africa. Maybe you can share with us a little bit of some of your main findings and how you also see the relationship between academia, private sector, civil society, governmental sector, and coming back to the question of how can we break the silos and find better synergies.
Sure, thank you. So definitely a core aspect of our work as a research center is strengthening this relationship between these different stakeholders. And perhaps a main finding, a relevant finding across our work is that as technology more and more permeates all aspects of our lives, so peace building, of course, but also health, education, and work, What we really need to break these silos is a lot of multidisciplinary work. And like Aya was saying, a lot of this involves bringing a feminist perspective to the forefront of research and of network building. Also bringing together people from different disciplines. We're talking about techies to work with social scientists, to work with lawyers, to work with civil society organizations, and so forth. Some examples of how we've been trying to do this in our work is that we work a lot on building and fostering networks of researchers and practitioners. For example, like in the area of in AI, well, there's a lot of strides happening in applied AI in the region, at least from a research perspective. Research on responsible, ethical, gender-sensitive, and inclusive AI is really still nascent, and again needs these type of multidisciplinary teams to engage with the stakeholders and provide relevant material for policymakers to ensure that the policies that are created are responsive and inclusive. One way we're doing this is in one of our projects, we're building a data, and we're calling it the MENA Data and AI Observatory, where we're bringing together these different teams from different countries to work on empirical research with a gender perspective on areas of responsible governance of artificial intelligence technologies in areas like health or food security. We've also engaged with the private sector and with startups from the onset in designing our projects to also identify their needs from their perspectives. One more example is a project we're working on as part of a global network. It's called the Fair Work Project, and this is a project championed by the Oxford Internet Institute. And it's a global project that aims to raise awareness about standards of work in platform work, so gig work and online work, and of course for women. In this project from the onset, as part of the research design, we engage with private sector, with startups, with, of course, the beneficiaries, which are the gig platform workers, and of course, women gig platform workers. And we have seen examples where this engagement between academia and private sector has brought about positive changes, where we were able to work with two of the startups within the project on incorporating an anti-discrimination clause into their bylaws. And they were able to successfully do this, and we see this as a small step, but it is an example of breaking the silo. Just one last example is another initiative we're working on, which is applied feminist AI in the region as part of the A+ Alliance. And again, in this project, we saw how it isn't very easy or doesn't really come naturally to see people, experts from different disciplines working together. And a big part of the work we've been trying to do there is to bring together people from different disciplines, so techies, social scientists, and so forth, of course, with a feminist perspective on building applied AI solutions. So these are just a few examples of what we're trying to do. Thank you.
I mean, this is absolutely incredible. I can really listen to you speak because there's so many ideas that are coming to my head right now that we should, have a third and a fourth round of questions and discussion. Unfortunately, we are limited on time. And at IFI, and of course, during our collaboration with the Swedish Dialogue Institute, we've always made it a point to give the space for the youth and for young women to present some of their reflections on the work that they are doing. And because of this year's theme, we've given the space to Murielle Abiakar today, who is a master's student in crisis and security management with a specialization in cybersecurity governance at Leiden University in The Hague. She, I'm going to give her the floor. She has quite an impressive CV for someone of her age. Murielle, the floor is yours. Tell us a little bit about your experience in the digital world.
Hello, everyone. First of all, thank you so much, and thank you for giving me the space to share my experience. It all started when I was studying my bachelor in political science and international relations. The word cyber was always placed with everything technical and computer science related. So what caught my attention was when we started using it in different fields, like reading about cyber crimes, cyber intelligence, and so on. To me, this was something new. And as a person who's always fascinated about the future and the technology, I felt that this technology will take us and everything that we are living in into a total different space. So after my bachelor and 2 years of working on the WPS agenda, I wanted to combine something between the peace and security world and the digital world. So when I was searching for masters, cyber programs were all related to the technical field. And this was the only program where they tackle it from a governance perspective. In terms of the topics that we cover, we learn about the security in general and in the cyberspace, in the online and the offline world. We learn about the psychological approaches in cybersecurity, intelligence and espionage in cyberspace, digital justice, for instance, how authorities and legislative authorities are coping with the emergence of the digital world. Today, we have Google and Alexa that are being used as a strong evidence in the court and testifying. Algorithms are being very biased. For example, facial recognition algorithm could be trained to recognize white person more easily than a black person. And this is because of the data that has been given to this device. And it is not in any way intentional, but it could lead to more social biases indirectly. So the main objective of the program is that in the middle of this digital world, how can we protect ourselves? Where can we draw the line between privacy, our digital data, our personal info, and everything that we do share? There were so many challenges for sure at the beginning of the program. However, one of the biggest challenges, and if I may say, the biggest surprise for me, was that I was the only one from the Middle East. I wasn't the only woman, but the only person. Our master cohort is very large, so I am generally doing crisis and security management, where we are 450 students, and then cybersecurity specialization, where we are 90 students, which is still quite a lot, because back in my bachelor, we were only 30 students over the 3 generations, and no one would ever discuss being interested in cyber. And for instance, I thought that for some time, I thought that I was the only one interested in cyber. So no, when I came here and I find out that, at least up until now, I've been here for 6 months, I'm the only student from the Middle East, it was a very, very shock for me. And to start to realize and be aware of the difference between the two worlds and the huge part of the digital world that we are still very far from it in the Middle East. Therefore, I would like to take the chance to invite people who are interested in peace building to take this into another level and work on it and see how it can be feasible in the digital world, and for policymakers to be more knowledgeable in the area, and if not themselves, then also to include experts within their teams. At the end, when it comes to WPS and the digital protection, I hope that we do not continue to make the same mistakes we did in the offline world, although unfortunately, and as we have spoken today, we already are repeating history a bit. I encourage more women to participate in cybersecurity and to advocate for it, as there's a very high demand for it in our region. We should be able to create a space for everyone, and not only women, to feel protected. Use it to raise your voice and create peace, but be aware that it can lead you to other places and it can be used against you as well. The future is nothing but digital, and this is not a brand new information. We are already living it. The metaverse, AI, and whatever this technology will bring us in the future. This is our new home, where we have our belonging, our personal data, our info, and therefore knowing how to protect it is immensely crucial. And it is not the work of IT anymore. It's not their job anymore. Every single person should know how to protect themselves the way they do in the real world, because there's no way out of it. And this is our reality today. Once again, thank you so much.
Thank you, Murielle, for your reflections. I think I speak on behalf of everyone when I say good luck. Like you said, you're the only Arab or someone from the Middle East in your program, which has 400 people. So I think you are going to come back to a region where you're going to be demanded immensely, and you will be able to set an example for others.
Thank you so much.
I want to share a question we received from the participants to the panelists. What is the view of the panelists regarding fake information? during conflict and its threat to long-term and sustainable peace building? And how can fake information be mitigated? What are some of the ways? I want to add a curiosity that I have. We haven't touched upon it today. It's deep fake, which is also being used a lot in conflict settings and stirring instability and conflict. Maybe a few lines from whoever wants to tackle this question, but of course it's open to all panelists. Aya, would you like to take this?
Sure. If you'd asked this question a couple of months ago and asking this question now, I think the answer becomes even more urgent today than it was even a few months ago. Obviously, misinformation is a giant problem. We saw it during the last few elections. You know, I've been in the US, so in the US, misinformation was a huge factor in essentially warfare and being able to influence elections. So it's been a problem generally. It's really hard to identify what is a real video versus what is a fake video. With deepfakes, the problem increases. But now you have a whole new dimension with some of the new launches in artificial intelligence, like the chatbots, you know, ChatGPT and others, which essentially have made the ability to distinguish truth from misinformation almost impossible. These chatbots are designed to sound convincing, and they are more convincing than they are truthful. And so they are able to caveat, they're able to introduce nuance into the sentences to appear like they are offering well-balanced information. And in reality, it is nothing more than sentences made of fiction based on occurrence of previous data. So the problem is very, very serious. And I think that we are in the throes of what it means to solve it. One of the, earlier, Charlotta asked me, you know, tell me more about the work in ethical tech. One of the big areas of ethical technology is how fast should technologies be released? You know, when you're thinking about medical technologies, a new drug to be released, a new vaccine, it is expected that it goes under years of trial. Sample data is shared, the ways of doing the studies is shared with the public, peer-reviewed studies are shared before a medicine is available for the public. With some of these technologies, with most of these technologies, we're not doing that. There is an ethos of move fast and break things, launch and iterate. And so you have these technologies that are massively impacting society that are going into the world without so much as studies that are evaluating their impact, including impact on truth and things like that. So, you know, in the recent case of ChatGPT, within a few days of launching that technology, thousands and thousands of examples of how this was hallucinogenic and fake information coming up emerged. Microsoft quickly said, you know, issued bugs to solve it. But what they did is mostly by restricting the way humans interact with it. So the underlying tech is not being resolved. We're sort of introducing these fixes and these little band-aids on the cover. So that's one of the areas of research. Other areas include being able to produce technologies to identify what's fake versus what's real, being able to introduce regulation, things like that. There's lots of different aspects, but we are in the early beginnings. And it's really important, as Murielle said, that we have more people involved, more young people involved, more designers of diverse perspectives that are involved in helping shape these moments, because they will be mission critical.
Thank you, Aya. Would anyone else like to tackle this question? Hala?
Yes. Yeah, so I think I just want to add, I mean, coming again from a country that suffered a lot from these misinformation and disinformation campaigns, today we've all seen a tweet from, you know, an article from BBC that's mentioning that Twitter is not able anymore to protect its users from the trolls and disinformation campaigns. And And I mean, this is not a news to many of us, but I was astonished by the reply or the tweet that was done by Elon Musk himself, when he was like, yeah, as if, something like, it's as if Twitter was safe before from the trolls and from. So what I'm trying to say is that we really need these companies and these corporates, large corporates, need to have a responsibility to provide, this kind of, safe environment to its user. You cannot just, be negligent and you don't do your duty of care and just, leave your users suffer a lot. As I think one of my co-panelists said, there is a lot of, besides safety, there is a lot of mental health issues included. So I think there should be an emphasis on the responsibility of these corporates and how they should really should be involved. And I think in Libya, this again, it's somehow a good example that the UN mission really cooperated with Facebook and with, I think, Twitter, I'm not sure, to combat these or to end all of these fake news and misinformation campaigns. So of course it's disrupt the peace process, but there are ways, but it needs a lot of work and advocacy to do it. Yeah. So thank you.
Thank you, Hala.
Karima, can I just add one tiny perspective as well? I think I fully agree, and I think here we really need to think about alliances between different groups across the global north, the global south, those whose voices are being left out. And I think these are essential debates, and the region is rarely sufficiently represented. But also, I think there is something else in counterpart to on the issue of fake news. It's also who's setting the narrative. And again, initially, online spaces were all about democratic, right, participation. So everyone could give their version of the story. And again, looking back now, and it's something we've been trying to work on, is when you look at the archive of the last decade in the Arab region, which is essential for us to understand, regardless of where you fall on the issues of what's been happening, things are being erased. Things are being erased systematically from the sort of archive of key activists, be it on Facebook, be it on Twitter, using things like counterterrorism law, using various things to kind of erase people's online presence. And what we end up finding is that the online version of events looks very much like the official sponsored version. So it's not just about fake news anymore versus real news. It's also about which news you're accessing. And the online space, it looks increasingly like the state all dominated narrative with a lot of noise that you can't trust, and just these state narratives. And I think that's also something to be careful of, particularly as the algorithms start, they want to monetize these algorithms. So it's about who pays, it's about clickbaits and so forth.
Super interesting. Definitely this idea of having these, alliances, creating alliances, whether it's geographical, sectoral, and across different expertise, something that, I'm sure the Arab Reform Initiative is doing in the region. IFI is trying to do this in the region, the Swedish Dialogue Institute, in the context, of course, of peace and security. We're trying to do this in the region, but it would be very interesting that in the coming months or years, we set something a little bit more institutional when it comes to these collaboration, specifically when it comes to innovation and technology, and how this feeds into conflict transformation, conflict resolution, conflict management, and peace building. Because I feel like this is really, for centuries, we've had the conflict happening also in the kinetic space, right, in the physical space, land, air, and sea. Today, you have conflict also happening in cyberspace, in the digital space. So it's not only the technologies feeding into the physical space, but also the technologies mitigating conflict within cyberspace itself. So there's so much to talk and discuss. Unfortunately, we need to wrap up, and we're going to do a quick round of recommendations. What can or should be done to contribute to bridge the digital gender gap and to create conditions for more inclusive peace building in the digital age. I'm going to go in the same order that Charlotta suggested: Hala, Aya, Nadim, and Nadine.
Okay, thank you. So I think I want to talk about legislation because I think there was a very good question about that in the question. I think it's very important that, yes, of course, issuing legislation is really slow, but it happens. In Libya, we have an anti-cyber or cybercrime law, despite of all the issues we have in legislation processes. But as Nadim said, it's only designed to protect the ones who are in the political sphere, right? It's not really to provide a free space to those who work in or those who want to practice their rights for freedom of speech and so on and so forth. I also want to talk about, I think Nadine mentioned, or someone else, it's really about employment and economic. And since I've worked a lot in this, I think legislations regarding, I think there is like a trend of having more and more legislation about online and distance employment. And I think we really need to be careful when we approach this, because usually it's designed in this region in a way that we want women to be in the house. We want women to work online. We don't want women in public spaces. And I've seen many drafts of law and suggestion that they want to use this technology to exclude women from the whole process. And I think we really need to be careful again when we're advancing this agenda, and we really need to, whenever it comes to, technology, innovation, and also employment, we really need to have a gender perspective to all these laws and legislation. Yeah, and thank you, everyone. It was really an interesting discussion.
Thank you, Hala. Thank you. Very, a very interesting perspective. Thank you. Aya?
My recommendations are the science is clear on this topic. Companies with more women perform better. Companies with women as co-founders do 10% or more in revenue. Boards with women on them have higher sense of corporate social responsibility. Women with companies with women leaders hire 6 times more women. The science has been very clear for the past decade. My recommendation is for people in the workplace, particularly in tech, to stop debating the premise and start acting on it. Hire more women, promote more women, put more women on your boards, put more women in leadership, make sure your design teams and your technology teams have a lot of women representation, as well as other underserved communities. Stop asking for these communities to continuously make a case for why it's important, and let's use the energy for actually doing the work, because time is limited and technology is moving fast, and we have a small window to be able to action change, but it's going to be closing.
My dream is to get an early retirement and stop talking about all these women issues that we talk about, because we've achieved everything and we have equality, and especially, at least in my field of peace and security. So yeah, we need to channel our energy exactly where you said, we're done debating. Just now let's be solution oriented. Thank you, Aya, for that. Nadim?
No, I mean, I think I fully agree in terms of representation. I just add, for me, 2 things. One is my usual mantra about accountability. And I think even when it comes to digital spaces and women, peace and security in the digital space, if there is no accountability, there's never going to be a real reduction in violence, and so we're failing right now in our campaigns for accountability offline in our region. But can we, at least these new big global companies, can they pay a bit more attention to what's happening? I think Aya was describing how, they sometimes roll out a technology, break some eggs and move on. Problem is the eggs are breaking in our backyard. It's not in theirs, right? They move on and it's okay. So we need to hold them accountable for this. We need to make sure that technology that is being transferred to the region is technology that enables effective participation by all vulnerable groups, and not just technology that is used to repress such groups. And this requires holding them accountable for the damage being done. And I think here, again, I think the issue of alliances, and maybe that's, for me, the other point, I fully agree with you, Karma, is, look, the challenges we're describing here are massive. They're massive across the world. We're seeing it. But they're also, we could be having the same discussion about the negative impact of how online attacks against women political participation in a place like the UK or the US or New Zealand, right? But our region is even more worse off because of the restrictive spaces and the broader power dynamics. So we need to think about creative alliances across our region, from our region to the rest of the world, to address some of these issues, because the power imbalances are huge. I mean, so how do you push Twitter today and Facebook to take more seriously what's happening in the Arab region, on Arab languages, on attacks? How do we also have a more honest conversation about the imbalances within our region? And what does that mean in practice? And how do we make sure that, look at the, there used to be a joke about how, printed media used to be dominated by certain forms of capital from the Arab region, right? And they were publishing it and so forth. But now you look at some of the online platforms, and they're being dominated by some of the same interests. So how do we counter that to stay true to that initial hope that technology has in it the capacity of being an emancipatory force? But unfortunately, the way it's being rolled out, the way it's being used, it ends up, even when it comes to job creation, it's about creating jobs in the gig economy. So it's like underpaid, no social protection types of jobs. So how do we reverse that? And for me, that the only way is through alliances. Thank you.
Fully on board and on the same page. It's a massive undertaking to be done alone by anyone. Maybe an idea would be some of our institutes, organizations to come together and have a coalition that can address Twitter and Facebook, in a collective manner, instead of each one doing it separately. Having these constructive discussions with their leadership in the MENA leadership on these some of these issues. Just a few ideas that I got inspired by from you, Nadim, Aya, and Hala and Nadine by listening to you. So I hope this will only be the beginning of the discussion and not the end at 4:30 when we stop and all of us go back to our other tasks and responsibilities, and that this would be something that we would maybe continue discussing separately as organizations and individuals. Nadine.
Sure, thank you, Karma. So I just like to say that what I see as a recommendation going forward, and building on what my fellow panelists said, we definitely, when we talk, for example, like Nadim was saying, just about gig work and those type of conditions for women, or in general, women's inclusion in the digital economy. Let me speak about my area of the economy and that sort of thing. What we need is that we need to see an enabling environment for women, so that they are able to harness these technologies and to make the technologies more inclusive for women. So we need policies that are tailored to support women's the necessary education they need to fully participate in the digital economy, the appropriate tech infrastructure, not just education as well. So we're talking about skills and digital skills tailored for women. In addition to also working on building technologies that are more inclusive of women. And again, like I was saying, so that really just does involve getting women to be the builders of the tech, not just the users, women coders, women data scientists, and so forth. And I think just from a research point of view, we've seen that the more we collect grounds up data that is gendered and tailored to understand the needs of women in the digital economy and in other aspects in these very new, novel, dynamic areas, that would help us guide and tailor these policies in that direction. So yeah, that's my recommendation. And thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much. I want, together with Charlotta, to thank our panelists and the participants for being with us in the past hour and a half, listening to digital for all, digital spaces for all, which is, I'd like to remind, aligned with the priority theme of the upcoming 67th session of the Commission on the Status of Women, Innovation and Technology Change, and Education in the Digital Age for Achieving Gender Equality. I want to thank everyone. I want to remind you that this webinar was recorded, and so you can find the link and share it with those who were not able to attend. I know that I'm going to listen to the whole thing again for sure, because I couldn't take all the notes, and there are so many ideas that I want to capture. Thank you for your time. Thank you for doing what you do, for your energy, for your dedication. All of you are doing impact in your own societies, and thank you for taking some time away from that to speak with us.
Thank you, Karma. Thank you, everyone. Absolutely wonderful to meet you and great discussion.